Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we are doing our series on cults and cult psychology, and we're due to talk about this thing called the Zimbardo experiment. But Daniel was being nice because I said, "Hey, let's hold that off for a second and do something a little bit different." This will be a bit of a surprise episode for Daniel because it's just some ideas I had that I wanted to throw and get his opinion about them. Uh, in the theme of talking about cults and cult psychology,
Social psychology, you know.
social psychology. The social psychology, I guess that's pertinent to like cult thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know Zimbardo experiment, the ever popular Zimbardo experiment. Who doesn't want to talk about a bunch of dudes in a fake prison experiment torturing each other? But we'll just have to wait a week, y'all.
Yeah.
I wanted to do something a little bit more for context because as we've talked about, this is sort of our response to what's happening now in the US. We're recording this in April of 2025. And since we're an educationally kind of like oriented podcast, we had the conversations about like what's the right way for us to talk about things.
Yeah.
And this seemed to be a part that was the right way to do it because we like to educate. And I was thinking about Daniel, and especially if we get people who maybe only know us through like these kinds of episodes now about this subject matter. As you
Yeah.
say, 85% of the audience is always new.
Yeah.
You were just telling me that. But we're the kind of like a general spirituality podcast. So we're kind of there's a PBS show that's kind of like all things considered, and we're like all things spiritually considered,
Yes.
right? The idea like we do everything that seems to have a spiritual bent to it, anything that like that seems to be important for like psychospiritual development, we do. And we're going to talk about, which means we ramble a lot to all these different subject matters, which might be different from other podcasts, right, Daniel? A lot of them are like super focused.
A lot of, so if you're tuning in for the first time or you've been with us for a while, we get in sometimes to some rabbit holes that it's related. We're on topic. It's just everything is intertwined, it's interrelated. So if we find ourselves, in a field that is adjacent, then we're going to explore the connection to that because it's relevant to what we're doing. Most of the time. We're also totally dudes and we do sometimes talk shit. So, there's also that.
But I feel like everything we do has like a psycho-spiritual kind of like twist to it or a psycho-spiritual connection to it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and even in that term, psycho-spiritual, it's psychological and spiritual, and it's the meeting of the two, which is essentially what our podcast is. You have a deep background in psychology, and we bring, from our own backgrounds in Taoism, Buddhism, Chinese medicine, shamanism, all the other
Yeah.
Kabbalism. We used to have a long introduction done by this really wonderful African American woman with a fantastic speaking voice. But given that we moved to video, we don't have like a minute long intro like we used to have. But she did all of the isms that we blend them together, and that's how we get to where we are. And looking at the state of affairs as it is from kind of an anthropological point of view or a social psychological point of view, we're looking at it like, okay, there's a phenomenon that is occurring, right? And much of which is influenced by the podcast space for sure, which is uh, you know touching a large audience really because people have modern media or main media, media that is on legacy media, cable news and whatever news it still has a large audience, but younger generation and people who are looking for, I'm not going to call it alternative sources, but different sources outside of the standard narrative are finding their way to podcasters and finding their way to people who they trust, who they believe to be authentic, even if those people are wrong. So just right, pros and cons. And I've been aware of this for a number of years. We haven't really talked about it up until kind of now the last month or so. And this is kind of like our expose into something that we've been sort of in because we're human beings in this Western culture, but then also out of because we also work for ourselves and are not really stuck in kind of like a corporate structure. So we're a lot of bit more free to sort of see society from the outside a little bit. We're in it, but we're also not completely W-2'd completely, if that makes sense.
Well, there's like you could do a whole podcast that could just be about like season 3 of Daredevil on Netflix, and every episode of the podcast could just be about that. Which Daniel and I, that's an inside thing between us a little bit because I just watched season 3 of Daredevil again.
Okay.
It's fucking awesome. You're correct. It's the best season, like
Yeah.
no doubt.
Yeah.
So if you haven't checked out season 3 of Daredevil, might be
Again.
worth giving like Disney a little bit of money just for
Yeah.
that month, just to check
Yeah.
out season 3 because it's wicked,
Yeah.
actually. I forgot how good it was. And Daredevil Born Again, I don't know, man. Have you seen it yet?
Not yet.
This is the random talk part of the
Yeah.
podcast, but yeah, something weird happened. If you do see it, I'm not going to give anything away in it, but apparently what happened was like they were making episodes where they weren't going to include the connection to the old episodes, the old seasons. They were just going to completely deny that those seasons even happened and just reboot the whole thing. And in the middle, they said, "Well, this doesn't work."
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they had to like bring in another writing team to fix it. And I was like, "No wonder this
Yeah.
shit
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
over the place." I didn't know that story, anyways. But season 3, that's our next podcast project. We'll just talk about season 3
It's not.
for 12 years. But people do that kind of shit, is my point,
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
if you're really into it. But anyways, so we're trying to do things like again, the thing that connects, at least for me, would be like I think all of these things have spiritual import,
Yeah.
right? And especially because we might try to make it personal. So sometimes I think about it in my mind as like there's a PBS thing also called This American Life, and I think, well, this is this spiritual American life, and that's what we're
Hmm.
trying to do.
Hmm.
And so the cult thing is hanging around now. It's so important just because of like what's going on in the world, which ain't that great, y'all. So it's our way of trying to like do something that will help talk about the things that are happening. That we're not doing like the political news of the week or something like that. That's not our
No.
deal. But to comment in some ways. And so there's been a number of ideas I think are really important about this. On the one hand, part of our thesis, if we just are blunt about it, would be like the US, no matter how you think about it, where we happen to live, is being dominated now by a lot of like sort of cult psychology. It just is a
Hmm.
thing that's happening.
Hmm. Hmm.
And at a certain point, it's like, well, you better say something about that because it's the dominant factor that's going to be affecting all of our lives, spiritual or otherwise, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
See any way around that. And then we're also trying to talk about that there's maybe like a human frailty around cult psychology overall, right?
Hmm.
Where there's some vulnerability just in the human spirit, in the human mind,
Yeah.
right?
Vulnerability or tendency, maybe.
Yeah, I guess it's, those words make a difference for how you think about it.
Yeah, because a different vulnerability is something that there you can penetrate. There's a soft spot, there's a weak spot, there's a
I
place
see.
that you can yield, right, or has been yielded. A tendency is something that you can see frequently over and over again in a multitude of people that doesn't necessarily require vulnerability. It doesn't necessarily require a soft spot. I believe that we're hardwired in a way to be manipulated actually, you know and not it's not a good thing. Now we can look back at societies and say, oh well, maybe religion is the kind of like the first cult, right? Moving back far,
Yeah, this would be kind of like a theme that would probably hit this episode, and it's been kind of an ongoing thing too.
yeah. And so but then the way in which we see religion now is a hierarchical, dogmatic corporate structure. And shout out to our episode that we did a long time ago. Religion is the first corporation. You know that's how people view it, right? It's a top-down, male-dominated person one, generally, sometimes a couple, but usually single person in a position of authority, delegating, and then other people execute, and then those people delegate. So it's very much in this kind of hierarchical thing. That's the best way. I keep saying that word, but that's exactly what it is. And so I believe that people just, whether or not this is innate to us or not, the tendency is that it's there, and it's been there for multiple religions throughout the recent history of our species, and when that is not as prevalent, the mental psychological tendency to see things in that way and to be okay in that structure and not want to blow it up constantly, on the mass, right? Even if it's two-thirds that accept it, that's enough to keep things stable. Is yielding us, I think, some of the issues that we're experiencing today. is because people have just accepted that this is the way that things are, and they haven't really questioned, is this the way that things are supposed to be? Or is that the way that they are? And I'm just not, I'm just going to go, okay, what am I supposed to do? And that's,
I
I
know it's
think,
a weird
some of the
question,
questions
right?
we're asking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I was using like, I don't have an argument with what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
To me, I suppose I was thinking in terms of the overall mission statement of what we're trying to do, that this frailty, vulnerability, or tendency,
Mm-hmm.
is a psychospiritual obstacle,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we all have to look at, right? Because it's going to undermine the abilities to be for psychospiritual freedom or
Yeah.
transformation or development. It's like a stumbling block. It's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? On a social level, right? But also when you get to the individual psychological level or psychospiritual level, that's a thing, right? And like on the farther reaches, I was just going through these things in my mind, but on the farther reaches, maybe not the main theme of the episode even, but where it's underlying all the time, might be the deeper implication of what you're saying too, might be that like any given cultural social system is itself kind of potentially just like its own cult,
Yes, for sure.
right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of something that's come up in these episodes too, which is an ongoing theme. But and there's a Buddhist context for that or a tantric context for that. Sometimes they call these things conventional truths or concealer truths, which is an interesting phrase. There are things that are true for a group of people, but they kind of conceal the fact that they're false.
Mm.
With students, I do it with like the caste system in India that the Buddha might have been up against.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, it's bullshit. Any objective observation would say there's no castes, there's no people in these castes, right? But that's so true within that group of people. Now, what do you call that? That's a cult too, even though it's like a whole society that's
Mm-hmm.
indoctrinated into that cult. So that's kind of like I wanted to like give a context for that part. That's just because that's the space we're coming from with all of this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess even if we're trying to maybe use language intentionally, we could, if we want to change the name from cult, call it a structure,
Hmm.
because it is very structured. It's a pyramid, realistically, and at least the way the way I visualize it.
I have this thing where I want to call it like cult with like an exclamation point, like cult,
Yeah,
in that like just to have that moment of recognition. Maybe it's a Zen thing in me too,
sure.
just to have that moment of going, wait a minute, this whole thing I'm living in is like cult. That's a part of what I would think is awakening would be about too, to have
Mm-hmm.
that thing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
anyways, this is the context on the big picture, but in the immediate, our reaction to like what's going on in the world around us would be that when you look at what's happening, and would be a little bit political in this, but not too much, but a little bit like it would be hard. Like the word is being used a lot now. Like it's
Yeah,
not just us. This word is like cult is being thrown out a lot, right, for what's happening. And I was thinking, you can kind of almost see it as like these kind of interlocking cults that are kind of happening within
yeah,
this,
yep,
right?
yeah,
They're like, so if you look at like, and again, not a political podcast, but we're just trying to describe the world around us, right?
yeah,
So there's sort of like a cult of personality probably around this one person. And you'd be really good at pointing that out, Daniel, that like part of this whole definition of cult that we're using is that you need the charismatic figure,
yes.
right? Who's sort of the leader within the thing, right?
And just so we're, just as a reminder, again, because most of our audience is often new, our kind of definition of this, of what we're considering a cult or a structure, was given by, what's her name again? Stain, Dr. Stain.
No, it's a doctor. I think her name is AJ Marsden. We
Oh,
use that
okay.
Dr. Stain too. But anyways,
Yeah.
we went to a couple like psychologists who are offering opinions about this because there's no standard language around this. That's
No,
been
there's
interesting
not.
too.
But that the cult requires conformity, social cohesion, and charisma. And just a brief word on each of them. Conformity essentially is your yielding, the requirement of you yielding critical thinking. That's kind of like the key element in this, because in order to, essentially be uniformed in someone else's thinking, and in order to be uniform in the way that you think in comparison to those around you, you really can't question too much, or else you're going to be an outsider. You're going to become a problem, because it is the ways of thought to pass from one to another, good or bad. They do ignite other people. So you
Well,
cannot.
there's like a kind of a deep social psychology hidden within this too. So we went back to the social psychology literature. That was the way we were trying to make this educational, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we were going on like psychology of conformity because people have done studies around that, right?
Yes. Yes. Yep.
But the only thing I want to add before we're done with all of it, just as a preview, there's like an obedience question. How do you make people obey?
Mm.
Coercion and obedience.
Hmm.
We've done great episodes with people talking about their cult experiences now, which was, something that you brought up, Daniel, as being so important. Let's get people who were in cults and like broke themselves out
Yeah.
to hear stories. And it's been really fascinating, right?
Yeah. So we have a couple of those episodes coming up. Somebody who was in Jehovah's Witness and somebody who was in the Mormon Church.
Yeah.
And so then we have this aspect of social
Oh, just real
cohesion.
quick, Daniel, one of the things,
Yeah.
so the obedience part is part of it. And then the other part that I want to do a little bit on before we're done would be like persuasion,
Sure.
psychology around that too. How do you persuade people to follow you? So, anyways, I wanted to put those as kind of like subheadings on this thing since we're doing it.
Yes. Yeah,
But
and
anyway, so yeah.
those will go under the kind of like the larger heading of social cohesion, right? Obedience, persuasion.
Conformity and social cohesion have that certain overlap between them. Yeah.
Oh,
Mhm.
there's yeah, yeah. I mean, conformity is the individual. Social cohesion is the collective.
And social cohesion is more like a sociology term or something.
Yeah, for sure. But this is the standards, the way that I have since we've talked about it with again somebody
Yeah.
who's Jehovah's Witness, Mormon, and then I have some friends who are very conservative, church-minded Christian folk, kind of evangelical-esque,
Mm.
um, and it's very much in or out. You will be
Yeah.
shunned, you will be ignored, you will be excommunicated if you do not um, adhere to the collective, to the social cohesive tendencies that have been sort of agreed upon. And so this is required to be binary in their decision making process. You are either with us or against us. If you're with us, you're one of us. If you are against us, you literally do not exist. And that could be immediate family members, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, brothers, sisters. The relationship does not matter. And
Yeah, and
that,
we'll kind of nerd out when we get to it because there's some like Emil Durkheim stuff for people who, want to go to deep cuts. We'll do
yeah,
education, social
yeah.
cohesion.
And
Yeah.
then the last the and so obedience and permission or obedience and persuasion fall under that. So
I see it as
social
like going
cohesion.
along with like well we can debate it or whatever. I see
Yeah.
that like those are things in the social psych literature that go around conformity too. So it probably fits in all
Yeah,
of them.
but I guess I'm looking at it as like the group will do it on their own without thinking about it. Right. And so we had an episode that'll be coming out in about a week with somebody who left the Jehovah's Witness church. And when she was younger, somebody left the Jehovah's Witness organization and she ignored this person when she saw her. Now, she wasn't told to ignore that woman when she saw her in public, but she did it anyways.
Well, that's the internalization of the norms we were talking about. Like
Exactly.
it becomes
Exactly.
so deep. And there's a distinction drawn in the literature. I mean, we're kind of like going over these ideas and we're kind of talking them out loud while we're doing it because we're both
Yeah.
learning, or all of us hopefully learning together.
Yeah.
It's a part where you can go, well, I'm following the shit that people are saying, but I really don't believe it.
Right.
And then there's another part where like eventually it internalizes so deeply that that distance disappears.
Correct.
And all
It
of a
really
sudden
does.
it's hard to tell. And it's almost like it may even like for what you find interesting, Daniel, too, so much with like the default mode network, those things we talked about over the years that probably
Yeah.
rewire shit in the brain because you
Yeah.
won't even perceive the world the same way.
Yeah. And the last part of the kind of like the what makes it a cult is the charismatic leader, the charismatic individual or the charismatic founder. But it's that energy, it's the charisma of the person who is the kind of figurehead of it that is required for a cult. Now, that doesn't mean that a movement isn't cult-like just so we're clear. But in order to, be used as a, kind of a social term, um, you do need those three things: conformity, social cohesion, and the charismatic leader.
The other thing I would say that's a little bit funny about that, and again, we can debate definitions and we're trying to help people
Yeah,
think about this stuff. So even in like Dr. Marsden's stuff, she says it can be like a charismatic leader or sometimes this feeling of like divine inspiration or something.
sure.
And then sometimes that can go like into a group. So when we were talking with the Jehovah's Witness thing, eventually it was like the charismatic leader may be long gone, but the fact that there's still like a cabal of people at the top
Sure.
or something might kind of function in the role of that.
And if
So
we
anyways, it's like things you could debate out in these definitions because they're not like, again, no one can totally decide this. I like that framing of it. I
yeah,
think it's like simple enough that you can go, okay, yeah, those are 3 points. We can all kind of get what that
yeah,
means, right? Um, but there's wiggle rooms in these things, and she does point that out. So if you look at like
yeah.
Jehovah's Witness, who's the one leader? Well, they may not have one leader anymore,
No, it's a
but
group.
there's the elders, and then there's the hierarchy that's there, and all of a sudden,
Right, but they consider them like the the enlightened ones of the
well, they
bunch.
function in that role, right? It may not be like one overarching key figure, but yeah, they take on that space. Yeah.
But then, then if you look at what symbols on the back of the dollar, and we don't do this too often, but like what's on the back of the dollar bill, right? So if you're listening to this, I mean, if you don't know, if it's not off the top of your head, next time you have money in your hand, take out a dollar bill, turn it to the back, and what's on the left-hand side? It's a pyramid, right? It's like the pyramid of Giza, except the top is separated from the bottom and it has an eye and the eye is open. Well, this is representing the separate nature of the enlightened ones, of the awakened ones. And the bulk of the rest of the individuals or beings as a collective create the 90% of the pyramid, maybe more than 90%, except for the ones that are the enlightened ones that are on top. And those are the ones that are shining. Those are the ones that are awake. Those are the ones that are at the peak, at the very apex of the pyramid. We could say those are the leaders, if you will. And they're the ones that kind of are guiding society. So, even symbolized on the very base unit of our currency is this idea of the separate enlightened ones from the bulk of the rest of the individuals that make up the entirety of the pyramid. Because if you consider a pyramid, it's, four sides at the bottom works its way up to an apex, right? But you take one brick off the top and awaken that one, and the rest of it is just, I don't know, what do you want to call them? Blockheads? You know what I'm
But
saying?
the rest of us are supposed to be. We're supposed to be like the people just hauling along
Yeah, but I
the
you know I
pyramid.
most people think they're at the top of the pyramid. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, it's interesting when you look at it that way. I love bringing up the imagery because that is interesting, right?
Yeah.
All-seeing eye on the top of the pyramid.
Mhm.
Like, what is that about, anyways? Right? That weird
Mhm.
shit on the back. Like,
Mhm.
and when I think about that, there definitely is that vibe. If we look at like what's happening, because I try to be objective about it, and there's like obviously around like the main leader, and we can see this in our situation. So he's supposed to be like this person with this incredible gifts and insights and talents. And there's
Mm.
a lot of like references to like 4D chess.
Mhm.
Even
Mhm.
as like you looked like what was happening in the United States more recently, even as things were going, around economic stuff in the United States based on like a bunch of really kind of dumb shit that was being done.
Yeah.
It was like you could listen to it. And from the people who were more in the in group of that, it was like you just have to trust your leader, trust him. He has a plan, he has a vision, he has a this, and they were framing him probably in that way,
Mhm.
right? Like he's a seer on top of a pyramid or something,
Mhm.
looking out in
Mhm.
that way. And for me, like these episodes started, and you can make out of it whatever you want, but like I was talking with people who were kind of like in an Elon Musk kind of cult mindset where I was like, wow, that's wild, man. They really have wild thoughts of who this person is. But for them, I think that's right. He is like the pyramid and the dude on the top, right?
Mhm.
Shining. And then like, in that headspace, there's a lot of that kind of talk, you know, which we'll probably get to a little bit more up the road in episodes where we'll kind of explore like what's the mindset behind that group too.
Mhm.
I want to talk about Curtis Yarvin at some point, but there is this idea of like there's an elite up at the top of this who
Mhm.
should be naturally commanding, taking control of the pyramid or something like that,
Mhm.
right? So the image is like very kind of like dead on. But the other one that I thought was worthwhile looking at today would be, and this is a hard subject matter, but we'll throw it out a little bit, which is like if you look at like the overall structure of what's happening, there's sort of like the Christian nationalist part of this too,
Yeah.
right? Which is in our bailiwick because it is a spiritual question, right? But part of this is like Christian nationalists, right? Who've like have this version of like spirituality, Christianity that's like merged with the state somehow in a
Yeah.
really weird way.
Yeah.
And it has a very particular, it's not like, it's not like all Christians are like this.
No.
No, it's a very particular slant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, we don't do too much of the political stuff, but there's the whole Project 2025 thing that came down the pipe is like it's a Christian nationalist
Yeah.
document,
Yeah.
right? It's like based on this, it's from this group called the Heritage Foundation, if you don't familiar with this. And this is the part where I think it's a little bit educationally good because a lot of people don't want to pay attention to these things, and you can understand why,
Totally.
like
Yeah.
people just want to pull back a little bit, but it's good to know what's happening in your world. And I think that's an important spiritual question, not sidebar to even like this, just as like a little tangent, but like I do think there's something to that. To understand what's happening in the world around you is like a spiritual thing to do. I remember I was doing this Zen retreat with Hosokawa Roshi back in the day. And like it was one of the breaks. And he was a kind of a great Zen master in that he would sit with us. A lot of Zen masters don't necessarily do that, but there's a hard training session. Zen retreats are challenging, right? They're hard. And he would actually do the sits. And it was amazing because you'd be there at like 4 o'clock in the morning and there's this great Zen master sitting with you. And he was willing to do that. At a certain point, you could be like, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. And some of them wouldn't, I guess. So for was explained to me, he's only a Zen master I study with, but that not everyone would do that. But I remember I was looking and he was like, at times he was like reading the newspaper during the retreat. And I was curious and I was like, okay, he's trying to understand the United States. He's trying to understand the world around him.
Mm-hmm.
And in meeting Gelek Rinpoche, Tibetan teacher that we sometimes talk about on this podcast too, rest in peace,
Rest in
Rinpoche.
peace.
But he cared about these questions and he would
Yeah.
ask you like, what do you think? One of the first things he ever said to me, we had a controversy with our governor in Illinois who was going to go to prison. And he asked me, and all the governors of Illinois go to prison. This is an Illinois
That's right.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see what
Doesn't
happens.
matter which part of the end, they all end up in jail in the
We'll see.
end.
We'll see what happens with JB, but
They
he's got the
all,
good lawyers though. You know what I mean?
yeah, a lot of money. But like it's a kind of a thing they all end up in jail. And I remember he asked me what I thought about this. And I was like, I was meeting him for one of the first times. I didn't know what to say. I just said I'm from Illinois. And he cared that I what I thought about this.
Yeah.
And he cared that I know what was going on in the world. And he was going to tell me what he thought.
Mm.
So I know what you think about that, Daniel. I've had interesting conversations about this. There's a natural instinct to pull away from the world, I think, if you're a spiritual
Yes.
person
Yes.
sometimes. But I
Yes.
feel like part of compassion and part of method, you might say, in like Buddhist framing, right? The ability like to help people is to be aware of what's happening in the world around you. Do you feel like that way too? I kind of do.
Yeah. So
So it's mixed. It's not obvious. This is not an obvious question.
this is not, no, it's not an obvious question. And I think you're right. And I think that is the sort of stereotypical view that somebody who is a spiritually minded person is kind of removed from, they take themselves out of this and then do their thing. But that I think is disingenuous in a way because you can't disengage completely. And if the goal is to free yourself, and then I know they say all beings, but let's say as many as you can. Okay, you know what I'm saying? Like that's the goal. So free yourself first, and then as many beings as you can along the way, and then thereafter or whatever.
But as you start to transcend time and space, you can do a little bit more. But for
Yeah,
now, we'll start locally.
yeah. We'll just
I'll just start on the block. I'll start in the neighborhood. I'll start in the hood.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And then
That's right.
eventually we'll work our way up. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, that like you have to be able to speak people's language. You do have to know what it is that people are working with, what the variables that they have, because it makes your teachings, it makes your connection, it makes the ways in which that you can connect to someone's heart and their mind very genuine because you're going through those same questions. Now your answers are going to are going to be different. That's for sure. But we're regardless of how in quote unquote enlightened somebody is, you're still a fucking human being. You shit, you piss, you sleep, you eat. You have emotions, you have sensations. Sometimes they're sexy, sometimes they're discomfort, all the things. But you are a human being, and you cannot pretend that you're not a human being. You are, right? Now, what's going on inside of you as you are developing as your life goes on, and if some people don't understand what I'm saying, let's just call it maturity. So someone can go through something difficult and they mature from that. And they may look the same as they did a year ago or 2 years ago or 3, but they're not the same person. They've grown, you know? And so as you do meditation or whatever, personal develop practice that you're into, it's working on you. It's changing you. It's updating your software, if we want to use that analogy again, you know? Um, but you're still connected to the world around you. And so you cannot like completely extricate yourself because then you're not in the world and you're not doing your mission. So how do we choose to do the mission? What's the mission? Again, free yourselves and as many as you can in the process. So we're in the process of working on freeing ourselves. And part of that is to have these kinds of discussions and then to also discuss with the people who find this useful. And if you have, questions, comments, whatever, please feel free. Leave a comment in the YouTube section. I check it. I do respond. Or if you have a longer question that you want to ask in particular, ginandtantra@gmail.com or hit us up on the gram at the Gin and Tantra podcast. By engaging with other people's minds and questions, it challenges us to look at our views more expansively, so we're not removing ourselves from things, but we're in it, processing it, doing it at the same time, and still trying to find our own authentic lane as we deal with the ever-changing world around us and the ever more difficult world that we are surrounded in and trying to find, meaning and a path through that feels like we are being who we are naturally, if that
Yeah.
vibes.
Well, I mean, I don't know what it'd like to think about. There's some deep questions in that, like what it means to be a human being and shitting and pissing, and some deep questions, because the spirit, as long as you're attached to this mortal coil, you're going to be doing those things.
Yeah.
There's a kind of a famous story about the Buddha where famous, maybe not that famous, but like a story about the Buddha where, like the backstory is that he could have been king, but he chose not to be. And I think at some point, I remember reading it and it was interesting. Like there was chaos in his father's kingdom and the risk of it potentially falling. And he says something like, well, it's not like I don't feel that. I still feel and care about what's happening with that. It's not like I'm totally divorced from that.
Mm-hmm.
Even in him talking about that. And I remember thinking, oh, that's a kind of a deep thing for the story to communicate that. Who knows if that story is even true? But, as far as it making a point, it wasn't like he didn't, in the story, he doesn't not feel anything about that,
Mm-hmm.
or at the
Mm-hmm.
very least, you have to kind of maybe know, at least understand what's happening around you, which is why we're trying to do these educational podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I felt there was like something that had to be shown here, which is like, is it fair to call this like cult stuff? And I think it is fair, right? It's one of the things I think
Yeah.
we have to prove. Or if we're going to talk about cult psychology and make the claim that this is all cult psychology stuff, well, is that what's actually happening? And I think you could look at it and you could say, yeah, there's like kind of like one cult, and then within that cult, there's like subcults
Mm-hmm.
that like melded together to become like the Uber cult, and
You
it's
have
different groups of people,
what they call
right?
it, a Venn diagram.
Yeah, that cult Venn diagram. But there's like the one that's probably just we're devoted to the charismatic leader. That's our devotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's another group of people like, no, we're maybe like the part that became a little bit more like Elon connected or tech bro oriented or something. They're their own little sub thing going on there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And they have their own ideology, which I think I want at some point to do episodes just to explain it, because if you don't get it, it's kind of hard to follow. And then there's
Yeah.
the kind of part of it that in that, researching for us to talk about these things, but there's the Christian nationalist part,
Mm-hmm.
which is, if you're a Christian, you're not necessarily a Christian nationalist. And even for other Christians, you're like, wow, we're not like that. That's a different group of people. They got a different thing going on, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they're their own kind of subcult. There's a kind of like, so unless you're a Christian nationalist, you're like, whoa, okay, you got your own deal. That's not my deal,
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of like, they're part of this thing too, that their own subcult. And they have this vision. They want to make everyone kind of follow their particular vision of what constitutes a Christian life or how people are supposed to live on some level.
Mm.
And they're part of this thing. That Project 2025 thing was like basically their document. They're the people behind that. And their ideas will make everyone live in our Christian vision. And, I was like, listening to some commentary on it, and it's almost has like an Orwellian feeling. We were talking with our Jehovah Witness guest about you get this weird language within these
Yeah.
things. So all of a sudden you're like, like in the Jehovah's Witness, they'll talk about elders and worldly people, and it's all jargon
Yeah.
and terminology around the ideology of that group. And so it was really weird because they talk about like, you know, in this Christian nationalist thing, they say freedom. We're in favor of freedom, but freedom means you're living this life that we want you to live. That's freedom.
Yeah. The one that we've chosen for you.
The one that chooses you, now you're free.
Hmm.
So it's a very kind of particular thing. And so those are the groups, within this, right? And so I think that was important just to say, like, there's a reason why we're talking about this, right?
Hmm.
Because it's not only that you can kind of develop like a model, let's say, as an educational podcast, right? Like, well, what's happening here? What is this? And you
Mm.
realize, no, it's like a kind of a collaboration of like different cults that have like bonded together. It's strange, right? And the one dude I was listening to was saying, basically, in a certain sense, they're all trying to use one another too,
Mm.
which was interesting because they don't really have the same agendas, you know?
No.
And so the one guy I was listening to was talking about like around the key charismatic figure. That's a lot of what they were calling patrimonialism or something. You do Patreon, you do offerings to the leader.
Mm.
So the whole thing is driven by the idea like it's like fits into your all-seeing eye thing, Daniel. I'm the leader and I'm going to suck up the benefits and people
Hmm.
pay tribute to me, right?
Yes.
I
Yes.
think going back to the Greeks, apparently that was like a known style of government. That was just, like we talk about oligarchies and democracies and monarchies and like that was like a thing, there'd be a leader who was the primary person who was collecting the tribute, right? And that's probably what that's a little bit about, right?
Hmm.
But these other folks, they're not part of that actually.
No.
They got their own agendas,
Yep.
and even watching like I don't know if you want to call it like what happened to the Elon Musk part of this, not too political, but it's hard for him because he's really not part of those other groups either.
No.
They're all different. They got different gigs going on,
Yeah.
and it was weird because like in a strange way, they're all trying in some potential way because they're all their own little ideologies. They're all trying to partially use one another,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And it's this very kind of odd conglomeration of people trying to like
Yeah. It's parasitic.
yeah, well, we got an agenda, so we'll use these other two groups of people. And oh, I got an agenda, so I'm gonna use them, and then I got a thing I want to do, so I'll try to use these other groups. It's kind of like that. It's
Yeah, but
strange.
that's, I mean, oftentimes they talk about the Democratic Party this way, that they call it a coalition, you know, and it's people who have adjacent ideas that align on a larger scale. You know, they
Mhm.
align far more than they differ. Therefore, they come together and try and, have a larger movement. They bring their different sections together to form a whole. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's cool that you brought it up because I wanted to talk about this too, because you had mentioned some of the things that came up as comments on some of the episodes we've done around this.
Yeah,
And we don't want to do like whataboutism, right? I think all
correct.
that finds that exhausting. But like part of what happened with the people who were criticizing things on the left, because I talk with people on the right. So I want to do intellectual honesty a little bit,
Yeah, for sure.
right? So the people that I was talking to who were more on the right were like, no, the people on the left are kind of like a cult.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they have their own ideology and they have their own whatever. And I was like, uh, so for anyone who would be listening to this episode and thinking that, hey, what about these dudes? Why aren't they going to say something about that?
Yeah.
I can say a little bit about that kind of on a personal level. At risk of pissing everybody off a little bit, but let's see.
Fuck them.
So like back in the day, before there was more of this kind of maybe thinking on the left. I'm already, it's not shocking to people. I'm a little bit more of a left person. I just grew up in a more lefty environment. My
Hmm.
family were like steel workers. They were like union workers. You grew up in that environment, right? And so, but I remember talking to, and on the personal level, as far as this being this spiritual American life, or this American spiritual life, I'm going to like actually meet with this person tomorrow because in some odd ways, our friendship and our relationship with one another kind of we had different reasons why we sort of lost one another, but this was a little bit one of the reasons. So I had never heard this kind of thinking before. I'm going back like 20 years. Okay. It was someone I knew from like my psych program when we were in undergrad together.
Hmm.
And it got to this point where she was getting like her master's going on. I went into Chinese medicine. We went to different grad school routes, right? But she was pursuing her psych education, more like social work. She was getting an master's in social work. And I remember we started having these weird conversations, and I just wasn't familiar with this way of thinking. So as a Buddhist person, I was very thrown by this. And it had a lot to do with like maybe what you call intersectionality, but I had never heard these words before, right?
Mm.
And she started laying these ideas on me, and I was like, I don't know what even to make out of this. But we had this bizarre conversation that hinged around who suffered more. It had a lot to do with like this bizarre thing of like, did people who were, black women suffer more historically? Or did like people who were drafted in the wars and had to run in the mustard gas and landmines, did they suffer more? And I was like, as a Buddhist person, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right, right. Suffering
I,
is it's shit.
I have no idea. And I remember I was walking with my daughter and her. And my daughter was really tiny. So I'm trying to even like place the number of years ago. My daughter's 22 now. Maybe she was like 3 or 4. And I was like, I can't follow you. Like, I don't know how to like rank the sufferings of different people as
Mm-hmm.
like a Buddhist person. I can't, I don't know what you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to figure it out. And I was saying, what you're telling me that a soldier who has to run through a minefield, I was thinking of World War One,
Mm-hmm.
getting mustard gassed in like machine gun fire and stepping on potential landmines and getting caught in barbed wire. I'm supposed to compare their suffering to like the suffering of some person who's stuck in some maybe horrible slave relationship and sexual violence and abuse. Like, I don't know how to, like, that's
Mm-hmm.
all horrible. And I don't know how to like rank those. And I don't know why I should.
Right, correct. Yeah.
I was like, I don't even understand. But of course, I'm coming from like a Buddhist point of view. I was like deep into my Buddhist practice at the time. I was like, no, this is all samsaric suffering. I don't get what you're talking about. And we had a lot of weird arguments that hinged around these things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, okay, I don't get your ideology anymore. Like I've lost what you're saying. I can't follow it. But it was definitely like, as far as it goes, intellectual honesty in the G&T world. I did get the feeling like, okay, so somehow I'm not passing some kind of purity test that you're running at
Sure.
me, and I like to round this. But you have to like see from my point of view, I can't judge the suffering of a soldier who stepped on a landmine and got his body parts blown off versus some other person who's the victim of some sexual violence. It's all bad. And I don't feel the need to rank that.
Right.
So anyways, I mean anyone who would talk about that in response to what we're saying, like, yeah, I can get that part of things too, to be intellectually honest. I mean, I've had problems around that,
Sure.
right? Talking with people about those things, and we're going to talk tomorrow and hopefully they'll go well and we'll see.
Yeah.
Like it got to this point, and I don't know what you think about it, Daniel, because this is in our wheelhouse. This idea, like whether there was like what some people will say is like a spiritual vacuum happened in the United States, an existential spiritual vacuum
Yes.
happened. And then what happened was all of these sub things started to try to fill that vacuum. Now, I've listened to people talking about, well, maybe it's because Christianity fell apart in the country on some level and that collapsed. And all of a sudden, in that meaning gap, all these different things kind of erupted. And those became the things that people started to replace the religious instinct. I know what you think about that, Daniel. I thought I'd get your opinion about that too.
Um, there's a there's a YouTube channel called the Philosophy of Ideas, maybe. I keep forgetting what's the name of this guy's um YouTube channel. Anyways, it's the philosophy of something.
Hmm.
Um, but he's it's a pretty big channel. He's got couple million subscribers, and he had a video, and I'll try and find it if I can link it in here. I will do so. But he had a video that talked about society's problem of spirituality, and that it is this exact thing. And he has a whole video on it. So again, I'll try and link it to this video in the description here. But that like it's a problem of spirituality. Man's problem now as a society is a spiritual problem. and it is the lack of spirituality, not religion. There's enough structure to go around, but it's specifically the connection to, let's call it nature, right? Or you could say spirit if you want to call it that way, or God or spirituality, however you want to describe that, right? But something beyond the mundane. In the Buddhist terms, they'll say, you call it conventional truths, you know, or we can call it, something that is just not merely bound to the material world around you, something that extends beyond Newtonian physics.
Or just the ideas of the material world. Hmm.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. And that this is the issue, and that in the attempts to find a solution for this issue, we come up with theories and themes and ideologies to try and fill that gap. But that gap that we're trying to fill is only filled by itself. And therefore, everything that we try to fill it with doesn't really quite fit the bill. So we're not trying to put a round peg into a square hole. We're trying to put a squarish shape into a square hole. Like it'll fit and it'll work and it'll do the job, but ultimately it's not satisfying that urge to feel, I'm going to call it, connected.
Do you buy that diagnosis of the situation? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Because because again, it's
This is all over the place. It's not just this YouTube dude or whatever. This idea
yeah.
is
Well, this
all
this video is probably 5 or 6 years old at least.
oh
Maybe,
no, but this has been rolling on for a while, right?
yeah.
Like, and I
Yeah.
was like, it's weird my experience because I have the people who would be more on, I guess I should do it on the right side. The people I knew on the right were like, all these people on the left have, we'll talk about with social cohesion. They have spiritual enemy, right?
Hmm.
Like, enemy, like this fancy sociology term for like, there's no direction, there's no meaning. It's just kind of like
Hmm.
there's a void.
Hmm.
But that's what's happening. So they like have taken on these causes or whatever as the way
Yep.
to fill in this spiritual gap and blah, blah,
Hmm.
blah.
Hmm.
And then, you could say maybe people on the left were talking the same thing. But the thing about it is, when I was listening to the people I was hearing on the right, I was like, well, bro, there's no difference between these two sides.
No.
They're the same. There's no difference. It's the same underlying psychology
The
that's happening
psychology
on both
underlying is the
sides.
same.
It's identical. It's like, if you go to the deeper part, the only thing I could say is, why I feel motivated to do more of these episodes right now is we're dealing with a part where this one side is particularly dangerous now, right? Because it has a lot of power, so it's dangerous, right?
Well, that is inherently what either side fears about the other side is gaining power and gaining the ability to implement their view, which is inherently looked at as bad by the other side. Now, I'm not doing a both sidesism because I think that's generally bullshit. There are policies and hopes and wants and desires that, hopefully don't get implemented, but that are harmful, period, that are harmful, that don't cost. My taxes haven't changed personally, and neither have yours really. Neither has
Oh no,
anybody's
I
really.
might get financially wiped out by this shit. I mean, it's possible.
No, but I'm saying in terms of what you pay, the money that you put into the government and how that gets doled out. You're not going to magically have to pay more. Of course, we want things to be used properly and everything else, but like, is it out of the small percentage of whatever it is that I'm contributing? I like to know that some of that goes to help people who need it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I believe deep down that most people feel the same way. I don't think that there are people that sit here and go, what would be really great if we just had a really wonderfully balanced budget because that would make things wonderful. How does that affect your material life? And I know that argument gets used all the time in different ways or whatever, oh, for the future, for my kids or whatever. But like, we're also product of the world that the baby boomers are trying to hand to us, which I don't know what's happening with it. Basically, I'm not quite sure. But to move to the point, the spiritual point is that this is this the issue is this, and that everybody has their own views on what they think is the problem and what needs to be done, but there is never a conversation around solutions. The conversation always tends to be around what the other side is doing incorrectly. And whenever one side gets in power, the other side gets stoked with fear, and that fear sometimes is necessary in order to get them motivated to make change, and other times not only is it necessary, it's based in reality. It is completely based. And so at the moment that we're at now, that fear is based, and the consequences we're not quite sure yet. And so, as people who are trying to navigate this with some sense of, or some semblance of self, some semblance of like understanding what is important to me, what is important to me, and what is important, I think, for me to pass to those who are listening and consuming this in whatever way that you are, YouTube, Spotify, short, or whatever. Um, there is other ways to do things. It is not binary. It is not simply a side versus that side. It's not. Look at the issue, take away who is talking, and hear what the plan is supposed to be. And does the solution that is being presented answer the question or solve the problem? And if the answer is no, then that solution is shit. And then and if you know the solution is shit, then you have to go and you have to look at the person who is presenting that plan and say, why did you present such a shitty plan? Are you an idiot? Are you selfish? Are you going to be gaining from this particular thing, or do you just not give a fuck? Or pick a different answer. I don't care. We promote critical thinking. All my answers could be wrong. There could be another one. You know what I'm saying? So all that I'm saying is that remove the context, because the context is keeping people trapped in their little thinking boxes. And that goes back to our thing. Now we're at the social cohesion part, or we're at the conformity part. Because if you question the confines of the thinking box, well, who are you now? Are you one of us? Or are you one of those motherfuckers? Which one of those motherfuckers? I don't know. It depends on what side of the aisle you're on. But
Yeah.
if you question that, then you're not going to fit in. But this to me is my hope, as the ideal of, post enlightenment movement, is to be able to have these kinds of ideas. Fuck having conversations about conversations, because a lot of podcasts are just conversations about conversations
The
about
best critique of
conversations.
like the Joe Rogan world, it degenerated down to like that kind of stuff,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, it's all this. I'm saying think differently. Think differently. That is it. And we try and present these things that are occurring in order to let people know that, like, you are inside of something whether you know it or not. You can only leave voluntarily. You cannot leave involuntarily. It's very rare does that happen. You know what I'm saying? But you have
Or
to
there's
be
the
made aware
Confucian
that,
quote, the way out is through the door. How come so few people use that method?
yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, constantly you have to consciously decide to go out the door.
yep.
Otherwise, you're still in the building.
You're still in the building.
Yeah,
You're still in the building. Yeah.
even if the building's on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
related to that, I got one more thing that I thought was important about
Yeah.
this to wrap up the episode. But like part of the cult thing too is there a divorce from reality? And that I thought was kind of an important point. Now we could all argue, well, what constitutes reality?
Reality. Right.
Okay. But like on a certain level, I was thinking, what's the Asian cultural connection to this of what's been happening? And I was thinking about, one of the really famous Asian books is Sun Tzu,
The Art
The
of
Art
War.
of War. Yeah,
Yeah.
The Art of War, right? And and it's very deep in Asian culture to have that kind of like, this is a major text of like strategic thinking, right? In
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Asian
Yeah.
world, right? And from a certain point of view, I think I was just like, well, yeah, like in the remit of our podcast to share these Asian ideas, you can just take a step back and say, what happened recently in the United States? There was a decision made to declare war on every single country in the world
Hmm.
simultaneously.
Hmm.
We're going to economic war with everyone simultaneously, even like the island that everyone's joking about with the penguins. So we're even declaring war on the penguins and other species. So is that a Sun Tzu move? No. And while you're doing that, you're also going to threaten not only your rivals, but like all of your allies simultaneously. All of them. We're going to threaten every single one. And not only go to war with our rivals, but with every ally that we
All
could
of them.
possibly have. Our neighboring countries,
Yeah.
other countries are going to threaten to take over
Yeah.
parts of them. We're going to take over parts of Europe. We're going to threaten everyone simultaneously
Yeah. Yeah.
while also declaring war on what could at least be half to the majority of your own population.
For sure.
Why we're declaring war on everyone in the world simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, if you're Sun Tzu, just in terms of being deluded, you are majorly deluded. You are living in some alternate reality to declare war on everyone
Mm.
simultaneously. That can tell you that you're perhaps in a cult mentality because that is not strategically sound. Does that make sense what I'm saying, Daniel?
Yeah.
Like you're not in reality anymore if you think you declare war on everyone simultaneously.
Hmm.
That is not how you do shit in a real world. You build up like alliances that you think are strategic. You do things in an intelligent way, like Sun Tzu, F, F minus. That's not good. And so, maybe that's the point when you look at that and you go, okay, well, there's something delusional in this, right? And that will tell you that there's cult thinking going on. And, maybe it's not the equivalent of like downing some of the purple Kool-Aid, right? It's not that level of cult thinking, but there's something like unreal about that. Like you're not in reality anymore.
Mm.
You're deluded, right? I'm going to declare war on everyone, or I'm going to declare war on my entire like consumer base. I'll just declare war on them and then be shocked when my company fails.
Hmm.
It's a delusion, you know? I did a little research on this. Apparently, it wasn't really purple Kool-Aid down in Jonestown. I just learned this. See, it's an educational podcast. It was actually apparently it was Flavor Aid. So if you want to go, I don't think it's going to change anything.
I think that's over the heads.
Well, there's the whole Jonestown thing where you drink the Kool-Aid, right? I'm drinking the Kool-Aid in the
Yeah.
cult, and everybody
Yeah.
dies, right? So apparently it was Flavor Aid. There's a little trivia for you, G and Tears.
Kool-Aid is
It wasn't really Kool-Aid. They were they were drinking
back in the
Flavor Aid.
back in the good graces of Kool-Aid.
Apparently, like the icon was it was almost like a little like candy cane looking straw or something for Flavor Aid. So, anyways, I looked it up. But anyways, in the end of this, I was thinking, okay, so there's a certain point where you could say, okay, this is no longer reality based. And I think that's the last point for me that was important to say, like, well, how can you call something a cult? How can you do that? Like, what's your basis for it? And on some level, you can start to say, well, is this really based in a reality anymore? And we could argue about like what constitutes reality, but like at a certain point, if like your whole idea is I'm going to declare war on everyone simultaneously, there's something off about that. You're just no longer looking in the real world. Left
Yeah.
Daniel speechless.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a strategic person. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, of
No.
course.
There has to be something delusional going on. I can't declare war on everybody.
Yeah. The argument that people who have pro that will say, you can't judge the book by the first chapter, you know? That's gonna be the other argument. And
But like somewhere in like the Confucian heavens, Sun Tzu would be like spinning around like in his grave up there or something, because that's
mm,
just crazy talk.
yeah, well the problem is just people don't have on one hand, people don't have patience, and on the other hand, people don't have strategy. And when you mix those two things together, you get a really shitty combination, you know? You get a
Well,
really shitty combination.
one of the things that like Naomi Klein, who's another kind of journalist, was talking about this is a lot of times in this cult thinking, they're death cults. So there's kind of like, okay, well, if we go down destroying everything, well, then good.
Mm,
That's one of her observations about this, that in cult thinking, at a certain point, you get to the point where like, it's like, okay, yeah, we'll destroy everything. We'll destroy ourselves too.
mm.
Eventually it gets to that point of like, we're going to destroy everything. We'll destroy all your shit. We'll destroy all our shit. We're going to destroy everything.
Oh, wonderful.
And I don't know if that's like intrinsic to the cult mentality, but we were talking with our Jehovah Witness person, and there's an Armageddon feature to this.
Yeah, for sure. For
And a
sure.
lot of Christian nationalist stuff is like Armageddon
Absolutely.
driven.
Rapture. Bring it
We're
on.
we're looking for rapture,
We can't wait.
right? We can't wait. And we're gonna like everything is gonna burn, right?
Yes.
So there's a
Wonderful.
certain kind of like death cult quality at a certain point.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
those are infused. Those are infused in the larger movement now, you know? I mean, like it's definitely there, you
Well, I
know?
mean, that's a little bit how you know it's cult.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Exclamation point.
Yeah.
Right? When you start getting to the point like, well, the main goal of this is Armageddon. Okay. And then there's a different reason why you say, well, maybe we'll declare war on every other, completely fuck Buddhist interconnectivity. Fuck that shit. We're going to declare war on everything on the whole planet
There
simultaneously.
there are some, and I've heard this on both sides of the aisle, like a need for a reset, you know? People are like, oh, we just need to reset the whole thing. I'm like, it don't work like that. There's something called causes and conditions. We are here because of many, many other things that have happened to bring us here, and you don't unwind it at the snap of a finger. You know, if you have 20 pounds to lose, you can't just chop it off. Yes, you could take some GLP-1s or whatever, tirzepatides or whatever it is now that, you could lose weight and 30 pounds in a month or whatever it is that people is. But generally speaking, you can't just erase things. Things
It's like
don't just
different than like saying I
reset.
lose weight by cutting off my own leg. I could lose
Yeah,
20
no, it
pounds by
doesn't
cutting off a quarter, like that
doesn't work
percentage of
like
my
that.
body.
Yeah, it's just not that's not how it goes. So yeah, anywho's.
I know, like, I think, like, you know, I don't even know if it's like the idea that there should be a reset or something,
No,
but
I've heard this. I've heard this.
yeah, yeah. But I think it's more like from, again, like an Asian philosophy point of view. Like you have to recognize there's other beings on the planet that think
Yeah.
different ways.
Yes.
Like I can't just like say, okay, now I'm going to pursue my ideology in complete blindness without any recognition of the fact that I'm like an interconnected being, like with all these other beings that do not have the same agenda as me. You're delusional.
It is
You have to
that's
say cult. And then the part of the thing is like, well, fine, fuck it. We'll bring everything down to the ground. If everything burns good, then we'll get to Armageddon faster. Okay.
all right.
Okay.
Good luck with that.
That's the under, I mean, but I mean, like for what we're trying to say here, is that part of like an underlying cult psychology thing?
Yeah.
It's so much us versus them.
Yes, for sure. It has
I'll
to be.
declare war on everybody who's not
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
simultaneously,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, that concentric circle in the cult becomes smaller and smaller until it is just a person, and everybody else becomes collateral damage to their to the grandiose idea of the charismatic leader.
Yeah. Or the cabal,
Or yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or the cabal who's trying to
Yeah.
use like whatever it is. But like, is that part of the cult psychology potentially too? Well, it's a certain kind of what you were talking before. It's a certain kind of us versus them thing, and we'll just magnify it huge,
Mm-hmm.
make it like it's us versus everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that'll appeal to a certain kind of psychology, right?
If you're
Or
gonna,
the other part would be like, okay, what happens if everything just explodes? Good, good. Everything
yeah,
burns down on the ground. I wanted Armageddon anyways.
if you're
Right?
gonna choose to sacrifice yourself for a purpose you believe to be larger than your individual identity, you had better choose that with your whole heart, or that is not a choice you're going to enjoy.
But I mean, I think even like from a certain point of view, you could choose it with your whole heart, and your heart could be like massively diluted.
It can be, but that's a different conversation for.
I mean, I don't think, no, I think this is the conversation. Like, if I'm deluded, you have to say, like, I'm sure the Jonestown people who were drinking the Kool-Aid were like, I'm into this a lot. This is my whole heart.
Sure.
You Kool-Aided yourself to death. I mean, that's not Tantra. That's
Yeah,
something else.
I guess the hardest thing to do is to change someone else's mind, which is essentially, part of what we're trying to do.
Or at least like give it like a conversation about what it means to like be so embedded in
Hmm.
this certain
Yeah.
psychological mindset,
Yeah. So
right?
what are our wrapping up uh ideas taking
Well,
out
I
of all
mean,
this?
like for me, I think there was a couple of things that I wanted to like try to do in the episode. So thanks, Daniel, for like having the conversation. It was good.
Hmm.
I think part of it is the idea of like, what's the claim of this? We're doing these things on social psychology related to conformity, obedience,
Hmm. Hmm.
sociology of social. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it as we've been kind of alluding to because we're diagnosing the world around us as being infused with a toxic kind of cult mentality.
Hmm.
Oh, and it's like dominating everything so much, right?
Hmm.
Trying
Hmm.
to say, okay, well, these are the features. So let's look at this maybe as Hosokawa Roshi or Gelek Rinpoche would try to do. Let's look at this through an objective filter and say
Hmm.
what's happening. Well, we got like cults, right? If we want to like use that language or, but we're using it, right? We're saying,
Hmm.
yeah, this is dominated by a certain kind of cult mentality. And you can even kind of label the different cults
Yeah.
within the whole sphere. And
Yeah.
then the next part is like, okay, so how you justified in calling some of these things cult? Because they're divorced from reality,
Sure.
right? They're not real anymore, right? And it's certainly part of spiritual thought would be we could challenge ideas of what constitutes reality and debate them, right?
Hmm.
But maybe one of the features would be to say, okay, well, obviously, if I take a step back and really look at this, this is divorced from a kind of a basic reality of how things work. I'm deluded, right? There's
Hmm.
delusions that are part of this. We all have delusions
Of
of different
course.
kinds, but this is like a certain kind of delusion that may come from a certain kind of cult mentality. Even the things you were talking about. Okay, it's
Hmm.
us versus them to the point where I'm at war with every other being on the planet. Okay, you know, or maybe this other thing, this infusion of like destructiveness behind this, right? But there's a destruction of self and other part that
Yeah.
starts to be consuming within this. So, anyways, that's it for me. I don't know. How about for you?
I mean, we had such a long conversation about so many different things all related to this. I guess, we always like to do this at the end. So if you've made it this far, thanks for sticking with us. Your attention is in the top 5% of all human beings across the globe for all time. Um, yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think I've said all that I've wanted to say up until this point, so there's not really much of a capper that I have for people other than if you cannot question the confines of the structure that you find yourself in without being ostracized, shunned, or shamed, then those confines are probably not healthy. And that can go for religious beliefs, political ideology, social conformity in any kind of way, or even like a friend group that you might be growing away from in some way, shape, or form. And the ability to see the cognitive dissonance between just your ability to choose differently versus someone else's desire to keep you in line has to ring alarms. It has to ring alarms. And if Eric, like you said, someone is not seeing that and they're deluded in their beliefs, and they don't even bother to question that, then those are not people that we can talk to, or as an audience, if you care about somebody that is on the other side of the aisle, whatever the aisle is, okay, it's not always political, whatever, then it's difficult. And I'm not going to say impossible. I don't want to say impossible, but it is far more difficult to try and reach somebody who is that far deluded, who is looking forward to drinking the Kool-Aid, who is looking forward to the suffering of others, you know? Who is at the cost of or for the benefit of the quote unquote greater good. I mean, the greater good is only based upon individuals who make up the greater in general. So without leaving them behind, you cannot have good if you've left them. Now it's just, better for some,
No greater
not
if
than
you left
others.
if you left everybody behind.
Right.
The
There's nothing
greater is
good about
gone.
it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just the idea to recognize that and really do your due diligence about seeing the confines of the structure that you're existing in and being able to question it. And if not, then ringing the alarms and really wonder where are you? You know, really deeply question where are you? And
And
if
it could be like on an individual level, or if you're trying to look out at the world going, what is happening?
yeah,
Then you have like hopefully, we do these episodes like this. Other people are doing their own things too around these questions. But
yep,
for us, it's like, okay, well, maybe the right framework is to say there's an explosion of a certain kind of cult psychology that's
yeah,
just permeating everywhere,
mm,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. Well,
Yeah.
Eric, as always, thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Daniel.
driving the ship. Audience, thank you so much for tuning in again. Leave a comment in the set in the in the YouTube section or on the Spotify if you're listening to that. Leave an email, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Hit us up on the gram, Gin and Tantra Podcast. Yeah, we like to hear from people. So, love, hate, anything in the different, anything in between, it's all good. We're definitely here to engage. So, thank you for tuning in. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys at the next one. Peace.